Hello everyone and welcome to This Nintendo Life episode 196. My name is NBZ and I'm joined as always by Bali. Bali, how you doing? How's it going?
I'm doing very well. I hear you launched a game this week.
Yes, Bali. And here's the thing, I'm not sure how much I've talked about this on the show, if ever. I think I mentioned...
It's more your kind of Twitter Discord thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's more of a like outside of the show thing, but I do work for a publisher. I work for a video games publisher and have since about the middle of last year. It's awesome. It's very cool. And I mainly have worked on mobile stuff, the mobile side of things and social media and that type of thing. But recently I was able to work on a console project, not only the console project, a game that is coming / is now, it's out now. It came out as the time of recording this a couple of days ago on Nintendo Switch. So I have launched a Switch game, which is fucking wild to me. It's pretty amazing, and yeah, it's called Rise of the Slime. It's available now. You can go download it. There's a demo on the eShop as well if you want to check it out before you pay for it. Obviously, for conflict of interest reasons, we will not be discussing it on the show critically because there's a lot of bias that comes in of like, hey, I've been working on this game in a professional capacity, so I'm not going to render a critical opinion on it, and I'm just going to promote it like a shill. So I'm going to be a shill and say it's on everything pretty much. The PS5 native version will come next week, I believe. That's got slightly delayed, but it's on PS4, it's on Xbox, all the Xboxes, it's on Switch, it's on Steam. And yeah, you can get a demo for it on Steam and on Switch, so that's if you want to check out the game. It's a deck building roguelike, so it's kind of similar to Slay the Spire, so you know, a genre that I'm very into, which is also very cool. And yeah, it's got some fun elements to it. It's like kind of, you play the slime, you walk around, you go behind enemies, it's almost got a kind of Fire Emblem tactical thing to it, where you move your character on this kind of screen to get in good positions to like backstab people and that type of thing to do more damage. But yeah, it still maintains the kind of Slay the Spire deck building element where you build up your deck and you go do it. So yes, I just wanted to let people know about that, and you know, I'm just going to shill and say go buy it. Obviously, you know, you can't take my opinion as like an actual opinion as I usually do of critical of a game, as I have mentioned. So yes, just being open about that and honest, but the game is out there, you can go check it out. So yeah, just want to get that out of the way at the top of the show. Bali, we have lots of things to talk about, lots of video games and things going on. Do you want to tell people what the show's going to be like today?
Well, in the first segment, we're going to be talking about the games that we can give an opinion on.
Yes.
Lots of games we've been playing. The second segment, we're going to be talking through some emails that you've very kindly written in. We put out a big shout and listeners delivered. We really appreciate it. So thank you very much for those. And then the third segment, we're going to check in a bit with the three people leaving Giant Bomb, which we've not talked about yet on the show. So we've got a question from a service to link into that discussion and kind of check in with video game podcasts and that whole shtick.
Yeah, games media, what things are looking like right now. And yeah, I mean, we'll talk about it in that segment, but if you didn't notice, Giant Bomb, massive influence on this show in lots of different ways. I mean, I can't think of a show in which we haven't referenced them at some point in time. So yeah, we'll definitely get into that. Be interesting to talk about, but we're going to start things off with new video games. Valley Nintendo, they're releasing new video games. Last time we obviously talked about new Pokemon Snap.
Releasing Famicom games.
Yeah, well, old quote unquote new old video games. It's the same with Pokemon Snap, right? It's like kind of old, but
favorite
still.
Thing is new old games.
No, their favorite thing is like old games with the word "new" on them, right? Like that. That's really
not very new. They're just old games.
Yeah. Have you played any more of Pokemon Snap since last time, Bally, or did you kind of close the chapter on that? Did you not go back for any?
I kind of closed the chapter. However, Caroline thought, "Oh, those Pokemon look cute. I'll give it a go." But she's kind of bounced off it, so it's not quite her cup of tea. And I think that's a really good way to showcase the game. To be honest, is the fact that I think some people will just bounce off it, and the game elements are quite light, arguably. But I think again, it's still probably the most beautifully realized Pokemon world in a video game. I definitely would stand by that. So I might check back in with it later in the year because there's
maybe go and catch them all or snap them all, right?
Yeah,
go
snap
that
them all.
Pokedex.
I think I've got like 30-40 more left. So there's a lot of Pokemon in that game.
I wonder if they add DLC at some point to that game, right? Like it feels like it's ripe for a couple new areas, like some new Pokemon thrown in there. We'll We'll see. But the games of the quote-unquote games of the moment are the Famicom Detective Club games that Nintendo released and charged a lot of money for them, even though they are very old games from the late 80s. But they are being fully remastered. And so a bit of history here. So I first heard of the Famicom Tantei Club, Tantei being the Japanese word for detective, which I pick up a lot in this game. When they say detective, you can read it in English, but also all the voice acting is Japanese, so that Tantei, so you can hear that a lot going on. In Super Smash Bros. Melee, there was a trophy for a character called Ayumi Tachibana, I think is her surname, and I remember seeing this character and being like, oh, that's a weird Japanese thing that I'll probably never know about. And lo and behold, it took 25 years, or however long it's been, 20 years probably since Melee came out, for them to release this game. Melee was 2001, so literally 20 years. It took Marth and Roy a lot shorter time to get the Fire Emblem games over here, but Ayumi Tachibana, with her one trophy in Smash Bros. Melee, has taken forever to finally release in the West. And yeah, it's one of those pieces. If you listen to the show a lot, you will maybe know that I sometimes like to go back to games just for a historical curiosity perspective, as opposed to being like thrilled with playing the game. And that's something that for me has always been interesting, of just understanding all these old Nintendo franchises and you know where they came from, and what they're doing these days with them, if they are doing anything, and oftentimes they're not doing anything with them, and they have very kind of scant references in different games. I believe Ayumi also shows up as a spirit in Ultimate, but yeah, they've really not done much with this series since literally the Famicom, not even the NES, right? Because the NES was the American system, and so it never got localized. And I think part of that, what I've kind of read about and heard about from people, is that the US arm of Nintendo back in those days were very concerned with certain types of content, because the NES was being sold more as a toy, as a thing for children. So things that included, which this game does, like a lot of murder, probably weren't going to be on the top of Nintendo of America's list to localize and bring over to the West, which is probably why this game never got a English translation, never got put into a Western market. And it's interesting because it really differs from so many of the games that came out in that era, which were very much like arcade style stuff that then evolved into more kind of console style stuff, right? Like you start with those you know sports games and those black box NES games, and then you eventually get stuff like The Legend of Zelda, which is like being a bit more of a full kind of console thing. But things like story and narrative were never really a big deal back then, right? It was mainly Mario jumps on Goombas and he saves the princess. That's about as deep as things got. Whereas this game is basically a proto-visual novel, and you know the fact that it is lots of dialogue, talking to characters, going to different locations, it really feels like where Phoenix Wright came from. There are so many Phoenix Wright elements in this game, and it's a detective game, and so it has that kind of mystery thing going on, that you're trying to solve a case or figure out what's going on. I think much more than I thought it would be.
I mean, there's no courtroom, right? Is it just purely the detective aspect?
Totally, yeah. So there's no kind of court stuff. You are a detective, and you're just going around this town, talking to various people, figuring out what is going on with, you know, this mystery that is surrounding it. And so yes, it really does feel like that, even down to searching in the background for objects and like using your magnifying glass and going across the screen and being like, oh look, this is the sky, and then the character has a brief comment about the sky or the ocean or whatever you're clicking on at that moment in time. And from that perspective, it's really interesting, because this game was from Yoshio Sakamoto, who people will know as the guy behind the Metroid series, or a lot of the Metroid series, and it's kind of wild to me that he was the writer on this, a game which I think has better writing than Metroid Other M, another game which he wrote, which definitely has, not reached the same kind of levels, I think. In some ways, it's because this is very much focused on a singular kind of narrative hook, versus that game which is trying to bring narrative into a series which previously hasn't had any, or at least not that much of a focus on it, aside from stuff like Fusion. But it is really interesting that this is kind of one of the first projects that he worked on at Nintendo. And so this is to say that if you're curious about these games from a historical perspective, I think you're the perfect person to play these, because if you're going into this looking for something that is as polished or as approachable as Phoenix Wright, which even those first Phoenix Wright games, I would argue, have their hiccups. I think the collection you played, Bally, smooths some of those things out, right? So like when you're looking in the background, it will have a tick on a thing that you've already looked at, and generally you'll have a good sense of like what evidence to present when, and even if you get stuck, it's easy enough to save and look it up, and sometimes it will just be a minor thing that you've overlooked and won't be that difficult to do. This game has none of that, by which it is to say this is so much more similar to the Link's Awakening remake than it is to any other remakes that Nintendo have done.
It's just a coat of polish.
It's literally a coat of paint on what is very much still an NES-style game. And what I mean by that, this is actually a really interesting comparison of the old Dragon Quest games had this thing where, in modern Dragon Quest games, similar to like, let's say Pokemon as an example, because you have better reference for that, Bally, of like, you go to a Pokemon Center and there's a staircase and you walk to the staircase and it just transports you upstairs and you're upstairs, right? In the original Dragon Quest game, to go downstairs, you would have to walk over the stair tile, open your menu, and press an option that said stairs to specifically go down the stairs.
It's like programming, like you have to do it yourself.
It really, yes, totally. Like the menu in the original Dragon Quest is like full of very specific contextual actions that you have to go into the menu. When you're talking to someone, you have to bring up the menu and press talk while you're next to them.
And that's on NES.
Yes, that was on Famicom and then obviously came over to the NES, a Dragon Warrior when it was localized for North America. And so that is so much what this game reminds me of, in that sense, that you have this menu of things that you can ask people about, but even like there's a guy at a station, you go to this train station and the station clerk is standing there every day and you go back to him and you talk to him here and there. But as you evolve and as you kind of learn more about what's going on, the essential setup for the mystery is there's this rich family, the Ayashiro family, and their patriarch has died. So she has like passed away. They think it's to do with heart failure, but the butler has an inkling that it is murder, that she's been murdered somehow. And so it's kind of a murder mystery starting from that point. And so you learn about the family, you learn about the sons and the nieces and the daughters and all these people and how it all interlinks. And you unlock the ability to talk about specific people. So it will be like about Kanji, about Yuri, about all these different people. And so when you go to the station guy, you can ask him about all these different people, but for the most part, he has nothing to say about any of them because he's just a guy at a train station and he doesn't really care about these people. And he's like, his main function is like, go over there to the mansion, that's where you need to go. And so like asking him about this stuff seemingly is completely unnecessary. But then you'll have moments in the game where the only way you can progress is by asking him every single thing, exhausting it all, and then doing a very specific thing like looking at him, and then for some reason that triggers you going forward into the next section. And this happens quite frequently. I would say it gets kind of bad in the middle of the game. That's kind of when I was learning the system a bit more and understanding what it wanted from me. But there are moments of I was stuck in this one office with this lady and I asked her everything. I was going through every single option. I literally did every option. There's no option for me to leave. And so I'm like, what do I do? And I looked it up, and you have to press this one option about file 3 times. So you have to press the same thing, which gives you the same dialogue prompt, which would make a regular player think, why would I need to press this? She's just telling me the same thing again, but you need to do it 3 times, and then it will trigger the next thing to happen, and you will continue onwards. So from that perspective, this is really where this game is coming from. It is so old in terms of its design and rooted in those ideas that it can become tricky at points. Now, I don't want to diminish it too much because I think it's actually really impressive, the fact that, that's what this game was back at the time. That's essentially what I'm playing now, that it holds up so well narratively. Like the mystery is interesting. There are a lot of twists that come along with it. And I was always on the hook. I was always like, I wonder where this is going. And I had my thoughts about where it was going. And there's certainly like parts of it that you can predict and see where they are going to link up to. But I think by the end, it really wraps it up super nicely. And all the questions you had are answered, maybe not in a like full way, because again, it's not going to be as developed as some of these modern narrative games are, but it does hold together and it logically makes sense and all the things kind of wrap up nicely. But what I will say is if you're coming into this expecting a modernized version of these games, they're modernized in some ways, but in the main gameplay department, they're really not. So that's definitely an important thing to note. And I don't think it's a terrible thing necessarily. I think one of the good things about our modern era is the internet has made things accessible. And so I want to shout out Kate Gray at NintendoLife, who has a guide, which is basically all the pain points in the game. So it's not like a full text guide of like you having to scroll through to get to the specific point you're at. Every chapter is broken down for both games, and you can find, specific moments of like, oh, I don't know what to do between the cliffs and this guy's house. I keep going back and forth between them. What do I do at this section? And she has a section you can just click on, go straight to that point, has a list breakdown of like, do this, then do this, then do this. Very easy. Very, very good to get through. And I think that's kind of the thing when reviewers reviewing this is they didn't have that, and so they had to figure it out all on their own, which could have been a little frustrating, I think, for moments. But I think having that makes it a lot more approachable for people generally.
Do you wish, and this was a criticism you had of Link's Awakening, was you were like, they probably should have done something, to Eagle's Tower and made it a bit more, streamlined or a bit easier for modern video game players. Do you wish they had done a similar thing to this game, or do you prefer it warts and all, and then you just go to a guide when necessary?
I'm kind of torn on it, to be honest with you. I think had you made this a straight ahead narrative game, in ways it would have been less interesting, in ways it would have been less accurate as a historical, like really my main purpose to buying these games and playing them was, I just want to know. This is such a missing crucial part.
I want to see the build up to Phoenix Wright in some ways.
Totally, yeah. And it's such a crucial missing part of Nintendo's history that all of a sudden we're getting it. And it is the thing I cannot overstate anymore is the artwork is stunning. It is so gorgeous. I love the way these characters are rendered in this kind of pseudo 3D style that also is 2D painted. Like the backgrounds are beautiful.
That's the thing that appeals to me the most. It's just like I'm kind of scared of kind of the rough sections you've described, because I really enjoyed Phoenix Wright. I thought there were some slow parts that I struggled through and needed a guide occasionally, and if those aspects are maybe a little more clunky with this game, it could be frustrating. But what I loved about Phoenix Wright was like the setting, the story, like how Japanese it is. Like I'd be really keen on all those things. So I'm feeling conflicted.
And those things are like ramped up here. Like the music is fantastic, and you can also switch between the soundtracks, like the old one and the new one. So I haven't played the second game yet. So there are two games: The Missing Heir, which is the game that originally came out, and then The Girl Who Stands Behind, which is a prequel to that one, but it came out afterwards. So I played The Missing Heir, which is the first one chronologically that was released. That game only released on the Famicom, and now this remake. The Girl Who Stands Behind got a Super Nintendo remake, and so you actually have three options for the music in that game to switch between modern, Super Nintendo, and Famicom, which is really cool that they did that. They included that as an option for people, especially in Japan. Like you can imagine there are people in Japan playing this who are like, oh man, I grew up with this game, and like this is so cool having the old music in it and stuff like that. But also for people over here, it's a really cool like addition to the game. And so I think that here's the thing: the story is great, and I think it's compelling and it holds up. And I was like hooked the whole way through. The artwork is fantastic, and the music, and also the voice acting. Right, it's not English voice acting. They didn't go budget wise all the way there to do that. But I actually appreciate that it's Japanese voice acting. It kind of feels true to the source material, and it's set in Japan, of course. So it makes sense logically, and it's I've watched a lot of Japanese stuff in the form of anime, and also played a bunch of Yakuza recently, and so I feel like I have a decent sense of like what good voice acting is for Japanese, and this is really good from my perspective. I think they do a great job of it. Like characters emote really well, and those animations go a long way to help that, to make it really engaging. But yeah, it's a hard one to recommend in some senses, but it's also kind of easy because you can just look it up on the internet, and it's really not that difficult to do so. And to be honest with you, I think like once I understood the kind of things that it was doing and what it wanted you to do, I did figure it out myself at points, and it was satisfying in a way for me to figure it out. And that's the thing, is it is definitely, I would say this is much more of an adventure game than it is a visual novel. A lot of people have been saying visual novel. Visual novel to me is more so a thing where you don't...
There's fewer dead ends.
It's less so that you have much engagement with it from a mechanical standpoint. It's much more that you're kind of just reading a thing and it's just progressing on its own with light choices or light things like that. Like I would say stuff like what Telltale did are more visual novel, honestly, than what this game is doing, because that's a very linear path.
You're making choices, but you're always going forwards. There's
you're
not
always
any
going forward, yeah.
dead ends, as it were.
Totally, but there are moments in this game where there are 3 locations you can visit and 3 different people you can talk to, and you're not quite sure what is going to trigger the next thing. And then it can be a point of every time you get to a new area, it would be like, okay, I've talked to this person, gone through all these options, but I don't have the ability to travel anywhere, which means I have to stay in this space and do something in this space. So to some degree, it limits you in a way that is good, because it means, okay, here are my limitations. I can only do so much in this one space. Therefore, I got to figure it out. I got to think, what does the game want from me? And there are rare moments later on where it's 3 locations that you're going between and you're not sure, where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do here? There are some really stupid things, right? The one I mentioned before of you go to this cliffside area, which at the start of the game, you wake up because you have fallen on the ground by this cliff, and some guy wakes you up and takes you to his apartment and stuff like that. Later on in the game, you visit this guy again, and you go back to the cliff, and he's like, yeah, I went to the cliff, and I didn't see anything there. And you go back to the guy, and he's like, yeah, maybe you should go back there again. And you go back there again, still nothing there. And you go back to the guy, and he's like, yeah, maybe you should go back there again. And I'm stuck in this loop, and I don't know what the fuck to do. All I can do in this place is look at the sky, look at the ground, look at the edge of the cliff, nothing. And then I go back to him, and I think the trigger was I had to look at him, right? So that you have different options on your menu of one of the options is take, one of the options is call/engage, which means if there are 2 people in a room, you press call/engage on one person, who then you can talk to that person, then you can switch to talking to the other person. There's also look/examine, which can be used for stuff that you have in your person, in your inventory, as it were, or you can use it to look/examine things around you with the magnifying glass in the background. And that stuff is quite limited in terms of, what you expect from a Phoenix Wright game is when you go to a scene, you will examine stuff and you will get useful information from it. And even if you don't get useful information from it, you'll get a funny conversation between Maya and Phoenix or something like that. And so often it's you look at the curtains and it's those are curtains. And that's it. And it's what? This is pointless. It's just this is the sky. The sky is, it looks nice today. And that's the comment. And it doesn't do anything. It doesn't really help you in any way. It's just a bit of flavor text. And that's the real prototypical things about this is it will feel archaic in those ways of well, did I need to look at that curtain? No, I guess it was there. And it didn't really do anything. So yes, that and it's very hard. It's a really weird game to talk about and to recommend in ways because of that stuff. But also, I can justify it in saying that if you've played a Phoenix Wright game before, if you've played those types of games, you will really enjoy this, I think, and you'll get a lot out of it, as well as all the other bells and whistles that go with it.
But at the moment, it's sliding more towards historical curiosity than top 10 games of the year contender, or is it somewhere in between the two?
I mean, for me, it's a personal thing. I've really enjoyed playing this year, so it might end up making my list. I don't know, but I think it works it does work in both ways. It just depends on your tolerance, right? And you as a person listening to this will know yourself, your tolerance for, I know Bally has no tolerance for certain puzzles and things in games, and this type of thing reads to me like the thing you will have no tolerance for.
Yeah. I mean, if I'd played all the Phoenix Wright games and wanted more, I'd be more keen on this than right now, where I've got 2 more games in the trilogy waiting for me on Switch that I'd rather go to first,
And I think I think we both are quite into modern games are good and we prefer playing new things. And I think you are far more in that direction than I am. I am far more interested in going back and checking out weird stuff and historical curiosity. I've played a bunch of stuff on the Super Nintendo Online. I think you've barely opened that thing, right? So that kind of speaks to our 2 different perspectives coming at this.
But I'm also in the process of, Bally's cross-platform awakening. So I'm spending a lot more time playing, Uncharted and games like that. But
yeah, older games on non-Nintendo systems that you had never played before. Yeah.
I've got a deeper well to go back to than you perhaps do. But.
Yeah, that makes sense, for sure. But I really loved this first game. I'm looking forward to playing the second one, and yeah, it's kind of quirks and all. You kind of need to know what you're going in for, and I think when the previews came out for this game, that's when my expectations got set a bit more, because people were talking about it of look man, it's the type of thing where you have a menu where you can take stuff, and that take command is used maybe twice in the whole game, but it appears on your menu the whole time. So you can there's this moment in the doctor's office where every time you talk to him, he just goes, And there's like every question you ask, he just goes, And I'm like, what the fuck do I do? And his eyes are closing. And this whole time in the game, he's had this kind of list of patient stuff on his desk of like this clipboard. And I'm like, oh, is this the moment where I use the take command to take the clipboard to have a look at what he wasn't allowed to show me before? Because it looks like he's fallen asleep and maybe he's not paying attention. Nope. What you had to do was press the call button to like engage him. And then he tells you to go to a place. And that's it. So it's like at points I'm like, oh, I've really figured this game out, and then the game's like, no, we just that's not what we wanted you to do. We wanted you to do something totally different. So yes, I've played. So that's the first game. I will play the second game soon, and I'm sure a lot of the same things will rear their head there. This second one, I believe, is more kind of horror-y / kind of scary, of like ghosts and things like that, which I'm totally fine with.
And they're quite short games, especially in comparison to Phoenix Wright.
Yes, I think that's the other thing I should mention, as it probably took me about 6 to 7 hours to play this first game, which is basically the length of one case in Phoenix Wright. So they're super digestible, right? Like they're really, really easy to play in a sense of, getting that story and progress in some ways. One of the other things I just want to quickly point out is this character, Ayumi Tajibana, who's been talked about and has been mentioned and was potentially going to be a character in Smash Melee. She is in this game, but I wish she was in it more. She's kind of, what happens is you have different chapters. There's like 11 chapters in the game, and so each chapter is a day of the investigation. And so at the end of the day, you go back to the office, the detective office where she is, and you kind of do a debrief with her. And then she goes and does her own detective work on the side to like help with the case, but you never have her with you. And for me, that was the real bummer of one of my favorite things about Phoenix Wright is the back and forth banter between Maya and Phoenix, and like having that companion with you the whole time. And you don't have that in this game. And I wish that's one of the things I would say, like if they were to do a full-blown remake of this and like add things and change things, having her come along as your companion to add a bit of flavor to it and kind of, give you a bit more of a dynamic would help a lot.
You have a companion in Phoenix Wright, right? That's kind of a big
That's what I said. Yeah, Maya is with you all the time in that game. So that would have been really nice, because I think she's really fun as a character, and I would have liked to have her more in the game. But she isn't as much. I've heard that she's actually part of the mystery or part of the case in this second game, so she might play a more prominent role. But yeah, I'm looking forward to starting that and checking it out, because I really enjoyed this. And yes, I think just know yourself when you go into this. Like, what is your tolerance for this type of stuff? Are you okay getting frustrated or going to a guide at times? And do you just want a good fun mystery romp? Because this is certainly that. And as a story, as a narrative, I think it's crazy that this was written back then. Honestly, I think they do such good stuff. So awesome. That is Famicom Detective Club, The Missing Heir. Check it out. It's out now. Bally, what have you been playing?
I've been playing a very short game that came out in 2016. I think it came out on Switch in 2018, and that game is Abzu. We've mentioned before, but Matt Nava, who was the art director of Journey, broke away, started his own development studio with Giant Squid, made Abzu, and then they made The Pathless, which came out last year, and it was one of my favorite games of 2020, actually. So I must be...
Yeah, I just bought that on sale on PC,
awesome.
So I'm looking forward to playing it.
So I must be one of the only people on the earth who plays The Pathless and then played Abzu in that order. So
Man, I don't know, maybe not. I feel like Pathless got a lot of promo at the launch of the PlayStation.
That's
so
true.
I feel like a lot of new people who are just haven't played that many small games probably did come to the Pathless.
Make waves, to excuse the pun, in 2016.
I think the thing that people thought about Abzu was it was gorgeous, it was beautiful, it was trying to be Journey and didn't like hit the kind of emotional highs of Journey, it definitely was. It's playing in that space, and it was another one of those type of games. And I loved Abzu. I really enjoyed it. I think it was a beautiful thing. There's this moment in that game where there's this enormous cluster of fish, and you like swim through the center of them, and it was stunning. It was one of the most beautiful things I'd seen in a game at the time. And I actually did a weird like kind of short like off the cuff review for Abzu back around the time it came out, which you can find if you search my YouTube channel deep enough and take a look at that. But yeah, I enjoyed the game quite a bit, and I think generally sentiment was positive, if less like effusive than the Journey praise, right? Because you already kind of had that moment.
Yeah, and I think I agree with a lot of that sentiment, and I think that breaking it down, it's very much sort of swimming simulator, moving from point A to B, some incredibly light puzzles, sort of flicking through switches, progressing, etc. And you're right, the cool parts of this game are swimming with fish, swimming into schools of fish, swimming alongside killer whales, and it does a really good thing with those moments, but they don't. It's hard to feel like there's much narrative build. Where I think with Journey, it's just so simple and clear that like you are getting to the top of this mountain, and that, as simple as it is, that's still a lot more structured and clear as to what you're actually doing than this game, where it's essentially swimming from world to world, from area to area, and you don't really know. There's not much rhyme or reason why you're doing it, and it's more just about taking in like the journey, and the like. It just looks stunning as you're doing it. Really, that's not really clear, and maybe there's more you can read into it that I've not really thought about much. But it does that job really well. It just doesn't quite, as you say, pack the punch of Journey, where you get to the end of that game and you're like, right, cool, that was a thing, And in a 2 to 3 hour experience, there's a lot more satisfaction with reaching the end of Journey than I've perhaps felt with Abzu. And for its length, I think Abzu works incredibly well. Like it's a really good feeling game. Like the swimming does feel very good. I must say that they only mention the controls very quickly at the start, where your little character's like on the surface of the water, and then it'll say like R2 is. So I played on PlayStation 5 of the PlayStation 4 version, and it says R2 is dive. So I'm like, right, dive. That's how you get underwater. And then I was moving around, and I'm like, okay. And for about a good 5 minutes, I was just going really slowly, and then I realized you have to hold R2 to actually project yourself forward. It's not just dive. It's
so it's not dive. It's just like momentum, right? Like
right,
giving
but they
you speed.
call it dive weirdly. So and
it's weird because like you're underwater basically the whole time, and so like
yes.
Dive is kind of the word dive to me means like from out of water into water, right? So
that's a very video game definition of what I agree dive would mean. It goes from surface to underwater. So yeah, it was weird. I think control wise, there is this very satisfying. It took me a while to get it, but there's like a triple. You can press boost in like a triple way. Did you ever work this one out, MBZ?
I'm not sure. I can't remember. It's been a long time since I played it.
So there's like you tap propulsion twice, and then you wait half a second, and then you tap it a third time, and your character will do like a little breaststroke, and then a big, like these fins appear from your feet and kind of swells, and you get a real boost of propulsion, which feels really cool. Like that was like the actual doing of moving just felt so good. And that's where I think it is more interesting than Journey, where Journey is more just kind of like, third person, walking around, moving around. There's flying a bit in Journey, which is very cool, but the actual act of swimming is very interesting and is really cool. And
yeah, I think personally this is my favorite like 3D realization of swimming in a video game, and it kind of had to be because the whole game is that. So like it was premised on like making good feeling underwater controls, and that's a thing I think that a lot of people stumble against in any type of video game. Like it seems like people just can't figure out how to make underwater feel good from a game perspective. But Abzu, I think, really does nail it and makes it like satisfying and feels really natural in a way.
Yeah,
so.
And I agree. It feels really good. I will say it kind of. They've got an easier goal to score in the sense that you're doing so little in terms of often games where you're swimming underwater get fiddly and finicky because you're being asked to do something that's beyond what feels good with the controls, whereas you're essentially doing so little in Abzu that the game's not requiring you to utilize the controls to such a precise moment or part that it kind of might feel better because of that. But either way, it works really well for what this game is going for. And I think like there's even some like weird walking parts later on in the game where you're like walking on land, and it's this very strange feeling where the walking on land is incredibly slow and there's no like run button. And I think that felt like a deliberate choice to like
very intentional, right?
Yeah, to make you feel like when you're in water, you swim like a fish, but when you're
literally
land,
a fish out of water.
Out of water, you're just like stumbling along very slowly. So I like that. I just wanted a little more narrative beat, but as like a 2.5 hour experience, I think it's really, really cool.
And it's like a beautiful kind of undersea kind of, in some ways, educational. I feel like there's, when you zoom in on the fish, is that something, because you can go to these meditation points where you kind of like sit down and it focuses on different fish and you can flip between them. I can't remember if it tells you anything.
I don't know if it does anything more than just give you the names of a few fish, but
yeah,
that is cool. And you can like hang on to fish and ride with them, which is really cool. I did it with like a killer whale and a sea turtle. That was cool, but like there's not really any mechanical reason to do it or anything. It's just kind of like a cool function. And I think that's what this game's just going for. It's just going for some nice vibes and some swimming around. And
and I'm totally into that, you know. It's it's a thing that a lot of games are starting to do a lot more, since I think probably last generation, even like the tail end of the 360 PS3 generation is like when more artsy games started to become a thing, right? And like Abzu is such an artsy game in that sense, right? It's light mechanically, you can't really die, I don't believe, and those types of things. So it's just a kind of exploration of a space, and I do like that games are able to go there at this point in time and do weird things like that. So
I agree. There's been a real rise in artsy games generally, especially artsy shorter games. But I do think that not many of them are just kind of third person actions is an exaggeration, but just a third person game full stop. I think so many of the artsy games are either 2D or they're related to like puzzle mechanics or something. Like I think Journey and Abzu feel quite unique, where I just don't think there's a ton of third-person action style games where you're kind of exploring or going on a journey, as it were. But which is cool. I'm so glad that Giant Squid moved on to the Pathless, where that's much more of a gamey game, and
feels like mechanically more rich generally, right?
Definitely, and it's a much longer game, obviously, and but there's still a DNA between the two that does feel intrinsically linked in a weird way. And I don't quite know how to. I'm interested what you think once you've played the Pathless. We can discuss that. But like, there's something about the two games beyond just the art style that does feel linked, which is cool.
That's cool,
and I like that. But I can't quite put my words into.
Yeah, I wonder if it's soundtrack. I wonder if it's just like some like visual flourish or something along those lines. But they definitely maintain it seems like the Pathless at least maintains a similar visual aesthetic to Abzu, albeit in a different world and kind of perspective.
Definitely.
So,
but cool. I don't know how well this will run on Switch, but it was obviously buttery smooth on the PlayStation 5 at 30 frames per second. But definitely worth checking out. And I want more games like Abzu, please.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. One last thing I would like to touch on. Ori and the Will of the Wisps is 50% off on Switch right now, motherfuckers. Go buy it. You lunatics. What are you doing?
Until the 29th, I believe. So I don't know what date everyone will be listening, but it's currently the 22nd we're recording, so you got time.
The TNL 2020 Game of the Year, Ori and the Will of the Wisps, which neither of us, ironically, at the time when we made that choice, had played it on Switch. I just bought it on the sale, and I've started playing it again because fucking what else am I going to do? I've played it twice already last year. I'm playing it a third time. It's, as we say, like it's so rare for us to replay games, but there are certain comfort games for me that I will just, like the Ori games, Metroid Fusion, those are the games that I will go back to and play again and again. And man, it really does look great on Switch. And I've only played it handheld so far. You can tell that there are cuts made and certain things of like there are textures that are super blurry and certain things in the background, but the thing is they made those sacrifices to make it run at 60 FPS, and that was a great fucking decision because it is so smooth and beautiful. And they made we watched the video, I think you watched it as well, I think it was a Digital Foundry video talking about like how they were able to get it onto Switch and what sacrifices they made and the smart decisions they did to get it to maintain a high frame rate, but also to kind of make sure that it still looks beautiful and had all those little moments to it without like sacrificing too much. And I think part of it is because on the Switch screen Ori is so small and the environment's kind of zoomed out quite a lot. You don't notice those parts, and if they are noticeable, you really have to focus on them. But because the game is so fast and you're moving all the time, you don't necessarily have time to dwell on it, or to stare at it, right? And it has such great movement and animation to it that none of that stuff really bothers me all that much. It still looks absolutely gorgeous and stunning, and obviously it's not going to compare to a high-end PC running it, which is like absolutely one of the most beautiful things I've seen. But as a handheld, it's just so nice having it, right? Like playing it with a podcast on the background. My back has been really bad recently. I've been having back issues, and so yesterday I was like sitting on. We have this chair in the house, which is like a massage chair kind of thing, or it's like a machine that you put on a chair and it like goes up and down and rolls it on your back. And I was like listening to a podcast, playing Ori while I was doing that, and it was just like, this is the kind of chill, relaxed vibes I need. And I feel like I'm good enough at Ori to where I know for a lot of people that game is quite intense and hard and challenging, but like I feel so at one with the movement and the speed and the dash, and it really is like, I think Will of the Wisps does a good job out the gate of like getting you those abilities. As soon as you have the double jump, the dash, and your kind of fucking lightsaber, it's off to the races. That's that's kind of the core movement you need. And then when you get bash, that's when you really feel, okay, I'm here now. I've arrived. And just doing that first dungeon again, going through the water wheel. There's a nice little detail I found that I'd never noticed before. In one of the top rooms of that water wheel area, off to the side, there's this table, and this table has a miniature version of the water wheel on it, that's turning water that goes into a little pool that then you have to reroute down to stop the poison water. And I thought that was just a really neat touch. There's the Ori developers, Moon Studios, had put some Easter eggs in the original game. There's actually a tree or a part of a tree where there's a little Triforce emblem embedded in it that I always find whenever I play that first game. And I think I'm paying attention to some of the more smaller details playing through this time. I'm, just going through it, enjoying it, and I'm sure I'll finish it relatively soon, because it's one of those games I can just pick up and play whenever, and on Switch, that's the nice thing, right? Like just having it in sleep mode and just booting up and just like, I'm playing it now, and I'm just going. It's fantastic.
Can I just beat the drum again? I just don't think that game got as much credit as it deserved last year.
I think it did get a good amount of credit. It's a 2D side scroller, man. This is the thing. It's like at the big awards, like the Game Awards, you're never gonna get something like this that's gonna pop off unless you're like Hades, where you have like a cultural moment. You're not going to get the attention of people, and that, I think, for me is a shame, because I do think those awards center so much around like Last of Us is a big, like so much money. It's just money in your face. And this game, frankly, for a 2D game, is a lot of money in your face. Like, holy shit, it's one of the most AAA 2D games I've ever seen in my life. But it's a 2D game, and that's what holds it back from like these big award shows. Despite the fact that for me, this is so much better than so many of these other games.
It's real shame. We've said it before, but like some not lukewarm is over exaggeration, but some not incredible but still very strong games that have a narrative, are third person, action adventure, whatever you want to call them, will just take up so much of the bandwidth of like.
Look, I really like Ghost of Tsushima. It's a really well made open world game, but it really doesn't do much new. Like it's one of those, and it's good. I platinumed it. Like it certainly had its hooks in me enough for me to do that. But like when you talk about game design and like feel and stuff like that, Ori is just like, it's head and shoulders above so many other games I play. It's just so beautifully designed, and it hits every mark for me.
Also,
personally.
want to quickly plug the video you shared with me, MBZ. One of our favorite YouTubers, Mark Brown, interviews one of the designers behind Ori about a very specific section of the game, and just understanding how he put together, like, right, so it's the sand area of the game where you're kind of like boosting out of the sand and you're
burrowing in and jumping out,
right? Like understanding mechanically how he reached where he reached with kind of like those mechanics. Like, I'm not doing it justice, like describing it now.
It's super satisfying. He shows lots of early prototypes where the game looks like ass, but like they have the base mechanics down, and showing the boxes of like, this is what we thought for this. This is why we decided to make this decision here, to make something that is satisfying and that like has a kind of challenge arc to it, and all those types of things.
Like it's like a Mario Maker breakdown of how he made that level almost, and
totally
really cool.
It's fantastic stuff. So basically what we're saying is go buy Ori and the Will of the Wisps. It's half price, so no excuses at this point in time. Great. Well, that's going to close out the first segment of the show. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back after this break with some of your emails. See you in a bit.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the second segment of today's show. We put out that call, MBZ. We needed emails, we needed comments, we needed questions, and we got some, which was really good to see. So thank you everyone for writing in. If you still have a comment, a question to write in with, please email ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That is ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. We also have a little channel on our Discord server where you can leave a question, a comment, an email, as it were. We also got a correction in MBZ, very unusual.
Corrections,
we're normally so right, so correct about everything.
Absolutely.
So why don't I jump into this correction here from
yes, absolutely.
Chariot Goblin about the last episode, who says, "Hey TNL crew, great episode. You guys were wondering when Nintendo got rid of instruction booklets. Believe it or not, this happened in 2014. Super Smash Bros. For Wii U, which released on November 21st, 2014, was the last Nintendo game that had an instruction booklet, at least in North America. Every Wii U and 3DS game that released post Smash Bros. Wii U has a slip telling you to view the electronic manual." So there you go.
Wow, good stuff. Yeah, I was thinking that it was the Switch era when it really turned over to that, because I assumed when those boxes came in, there really is nothing in them. And so, like, even though there is still stuff, I guess, in those latter 3DS and Wii U cases, they wouldn't have the full, like, paged manual that you'd scroll through with all the different... Especially in Europe, here's the thing, you got to consider... There's multiple languages, like 5 languages in Europe, which means that our manuals were probably a lot thicker than the North American ones, which I imagine are only translated into a couple of different languages. So yeah, that was also probably a big waste of paper over here, was because all European copies are the same. So like even if you go to France and buy a 3DS game, you can have an English version of it, right? Because all the languages are on there, and that's kind of how it worked for Europe stuff. But
do you
that's
remember,
really interesting.
I think it was Game Boy Advance, or maybe even DS, when you'd have to select your language before going into the game, right? That was just something that's normal, and then it became system-wide from about a similar time to a bit earlier in 2014, but
yeah, I mean, back then there wasn't like a system level thing that was able to detect that, and so it was on a cartridge by cartridge basis, because the save data was kept in the cartridge, or the settings were kept on the cartridge. And 3DS still has cartridge data, right? Because when you would have played Codename Steam, my save file would have been there, right? It wasn't until Switch when they decided that these cartridges are not going to actually carry the save data, but instead your console will, which in some cases is worse, in some cases is better. It just means that like if you lose all the data on your Switch, then all the data is gone unless you have the cloud backup. But
I like system level, and system level's getting more interesting. Like for example, the PlayStation 5, you can set preferences for like image quality, so like performance versus resolution. You can set that at system level, and then when you load up the game, it will automatically do it in the game, which stuff like that I think is definitely the future. Not that Nintendo will be there anytime soon. But Chariot Goblin also had another sort of interesting point about the last episode, which was you guys were also wondering about handheld style Nintendo games on Switch. I can think of 10 original ones: Snipper Clips, Box Boy plus Box Girl, Brain Training for Switch, Animal Crossing New Horizons, Clubhouse Games, Kirby Fighters 2, Part-Time UFO, Bravely Default 2, Famicom Detective Club, and Game Builder Garage. These are what I define as handheld style games, but I'd love to hear your take. Yeah, interesting that. I agree those are probably on the more handheld side of things. Outside of maybe like Animal Crossing New Horizons, I would argue most of those are fairly second, like BC tier level games in terms of Nintendo's promotion behind them, perhaps. That you
usually would have seen handheld. Even Animal Crossing is a weird one because it is like console / handheld, and it's kind of crossed the gap for both for a while, so it kind of fits either. Even though I guess as a style of game to play, it is really a pick up and play thing, and I think that's probably why Wild World and New Leaf did the best in the series compared to the GameCube and the Wii games, is because they're portable and they are much more easy for you to like every day open it up, play a little bit of the game, put it away. It fits that mold much better, which I think is probably why it's listed here. And I totally forgot about Bravely Default 2. I think the world forgot about Bravely Default 2. Unfortunately, that game definitely has suffered. I think the notion that Square Enix announced Project Triangle Strategy like around when that game was coming out was kind of like, well, you're really throwing this other one on the bus, aren't you? You just don't want to put it out there for people to... I don't know, it seems like enough people played it and people enjoyed it for the most part, but yeah, that series, I feel a little disappointed that it felt like when they announced the first Bravely Default that this was Square Enix trying to go back to old style Final Fantasy games and like make this new series a big deal. And it is, I think, a decently big deal, but I think not in the same way that they maybe wanted it to be. I don't know. Maybe that game has sold well. I'm not sure. I'm sure it must be like one of those ones that will probably hit over 1 million sales at some point in time, because it seems like every Switch game hits that. But
I think they'll just probably do a sequel to Octopath Traveler. That was probably the sort of traditional style JRPG that did
you mean like post Triangle Strategy? They'll go back to that.
Yeah, because obviously it's the same team, right? So
yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, the box boy games obviously work with that. Game Builder Garage, I'm not sure about. Like, I think the Labo stuff and that and Ring Fit and all this stuff can be kind of seen as console style as well as handheld. I mean, it probably makes more sense with a touchscreen to do it handheld and those types of things. Kirby Fighters 2, that's one of those games that I just don't even think of as a game. It's just like Nintendo released something on the eShop, and I mean, you could call it a video game. I wouldn't. Stuff like that is just like it's so forgettable that I don't even want to categorize. I don't even want to dirty my hands with Kirby Fighters 2. What even is Kirby Fighters 2? I don't fucking know. It's like a Smash Brothers thing.
Let's call it now. How long until an original, and let's just say 2D for the sake of convenience, how long until an original 2D, either Mario, Zelda, or Metroid game on Switch?
Yeah, I think Metroid actually is the most likely to come in the near future, just because Mercury Steam, and that 3DS game did pretty well, and I feel like they have been working on something. Mario, I think after Mario Maker, they are taking a little bit of a break before they put a new one of those, and they also re-released the Wii U game. And then Zelda, I think Zelda's focus right now is the big boys, so it's going to be a while, I think, for a new original 2D Zelda.
I think an original 2D Zelda will probably happen after Breath of the Wild 2, but I'm confident it will happen.
Yeah. Also, brain training for Switch. Like, does anyone realize that even came out? I think that's one of those games that did come out, and then at least it's not fucking devilish brain training in Europe, which literally took like the entire lifespan of the 3DS for them to even release it, because it was got like some weird licensing stuff or something to do, probably like some religious stuff going on with that, because he's like got a devil horns on him and things like of that nature, which I don't know. That was a weird thing, but that did eventually come out in Europe. It was on like Nintendo's upcoming like TBD on their like new releases for like 5 years on that list. It always said devilish brain training, and Don Koopman on Twitter would just point it out every time, and I would be like, that game doesn't seem like it is ever coming out, but then it did. So shout out to brain training. It's been a while since that was relevant, but I don't know. I'm not sure if it can be relevant again. It feels like it's just kind of been forgotten as a...
I think that's the thing with Nintendo. We've said before that they never rule anything out. Like, it's always lingering in the background for when they think the market is ripe for another touch generation's wild success,
Totally, yeah.
But yeah,
cool.
Thanks for the correction, Chariot Goblin. That's a very good point to make. Our next email is from Jeffrey, who's from New York City. Says, "Hey, MVZ Bally. The last time I sent an email to the podcast was July 29th, 2016. I was in undergrad, and now I am a full-blown teacher. It made me happy when you guys used my question and turned it into a whole segment. The last time I sent an email, I was putting a lot of hours into Monster Hunter Generations on 3DS. 4 years, 9 months, and 12 days later, I am putting a lot of hours into Monster Hunter Rise."
I love the accuracy of that, like just the pinpoint timing.
Gotta be precise. "It's unfortunate you guys never became Monster Hunter fiends like me. Anyways, here is my question for you guys. Which Nintendo consoles, handhelds have you owned and currently own? I've owned the SNES, N64, GameCube, Wii U, Nintendo Switch, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, Nintendo DS, and Nintendo 3DS. Sincerely, Jeffrey from New York City."
Yeah, on Monster Hunter, I feel like I'm going to play Monster Hunter at some point this year. It's something that I feel like we missed the boat on the hype train around it because everyone was playing it, but it's still time, It's not like everybody has to play it at launch and all that stuff, and I know they're adding a bunch of stuff to it as well.
I think it was the same day as It Takes Two or something. Like
it was, yes.
Preoccupied, but I think... playing it together, just giving it a go. One of us might bounce off it. We might both bounce off it. Might both love it. I think it's definitely worth giving a go. And I've heard enough good things about Rise where, for someone who's a novice to the series, there's enough there that can. It's a decent balance of tutorials and expertise that I think it's worth jumping in.
Yeah, and I'm sure that YouTube videos are all out there, so you can teach yourself anything these days. So
this isn't the early aughties, the aughts where we're just struggling.
Yes, the noughties as they call them, right?
The noughties.
So, yeah. So consoles, which ones do we own? Bally?
I think Jeffrey owns more than either of us, Nintendo wise.
Really? Well, I don't know. If we want to get really fucking specific about it, we can go down that line of every single piece of hardware Nintendo wise that we own. Bally, do you want to kick us off from your recollection?
Okay, let's go right from the very beginning, Nintendo wise. Let's go one lineage and then the other, perhaps. Or shall I try and go in order?
I whatever you want to do, man. Whatever's easiest.
Okay, I'll attempt to go in order. So I think the very first one was I had a Game Boy. I have a Game Boy Classic.
The original, big chonker.
The big chonky grey boy. And the one I got after, and that was like a present from my cousin or my auntie or something. So I don't think my mum was very happy about that, because that was the very start of something great.
It's the beginning of corruption,
That Game Boy Classic, and I had it with a Game and Watch collection that was on the Game Boy at the time, which I have unfortunately lost. I can't find that cartridge.
Oh, damn.
Yeah. And then I got a Game Boy Color. A green one. I then got a Game Boy
green. Yeah, I remember that was a weird color for a Game Boy.
Right.
Yes.
I then got a Game Boy Advance on launch, blue see-through with stuff like Crazy Racers, F-Zero Maximum Velocity, all the racing games because I love them.
Mm-hmm.
I then got a Game Boy Advance SP, and that was all I got for Game Boy Advance. I've already gone away from home console. Let's just keep going handheld.
Yeah, just go handheld.
I then got a Nintendo DS Classic, the big chonky silver boy.
We love our chonkers.
Yeah,
starting out
get
big.
those launch chonkers. So then got that. Then I got a DS Lite. So the white one, very, very.
Oh yeah, you had the white one, didn't you?
Yeah. And then the next system I got was a launch 3DS, the black 3DS on launch back in 2011. Right. I then got a 3DS XL, a new 3DS XL. I ignored the 3DS XL.
Yes, you didn't. You jumped between, didn't you? You didn't get the middle one. So
I got a new 3DS XL around. Well, when did I play Xenoblade 3D? It must have been like around 2015.
Yeah, it was around when it came out, right?
Yeah, 2014, I want to say ish. And then the next handheld, I guess, is the Nintendo Switch, if we're counting it as that. So that would
it's both, isn't it? So.
2017, yeah. And then consoles is a bit easier. I got a second-hand N64 way back in the millennium, and got Pokemon Snap with that. Then got a Nintendo GameCube on launch, a purple one. Got a Wii on launch. Got a Wii U a bit after launch. And then, a Switch again. Kind of counts for both. So yeah, I've not done the total number on that, but quite a few.
Yes, I am probably quite similar, although I probably have some additions here and there in amongst the handhelds. Mainly handhelds is where it gets real fishy, and lots of different iterations. So I have owned handheld wise a purple Game Boy Color that wasn't actually mine, it was my sister's, so technically the first thing that Nintendo console I owned,
in the family.
I didn't quote unquote own. I still don't know why my parents decided to get my sister a Game Boy and not me. I was clearly the person who wanted to play video games. But anyway, I ended up mainly being the person who used that because we got
an unusual decision from your parents. I can't quite understand it.
Yeah, well, we got a game called Quest for Camelot for my sister, and it was basically like a top-down Zelda game. It was probably the first Zelda-style game I ever played, but obviously I also had Pokemon Blue, so that was where that obsession started. I then got a Game Boy Color that was a special edition with Pichu and Pikachu, gold and silver.
That was your first ever Game Boy Color?
My personal one, yeah. And so that one I got in America before Gold and Silver were out in the UK. Went and got that over there, and that was like amazing because it like shone differently in the light, and if it was silver, it was in the dark, and the light, it was gold. It's a really cool piece of hardware. Still probably my favorite like original like unique piece of hardware that I own.
And it had the power light was on Pikachu's cheek.
Yes,
Fantastic.
yes, that was also very cool. So that would like dim and get lower when the power was going out, which is very neat.
Can't let
Yeah,
Pikachu
very.
die.
No, of course you can't. You can't let that tail, or it's like Charmander's tail. Can't let that go out. You know, it'll disappear. So yeah, so 2 Game Boy Colors. I then got a Game Boy Advance, which is the similar one that you had, see-through one that was the launch model. After that, I didn't get an SP. I then went straight from GBA to DS. And this is where I'll have...
So you never had a backlit
No, never
Game
had a
Boy?
backlit experience with a Game Boy. Just I had the Advance the whole way through, and it was a revelation when I got my DS because I was playing Metroid Fusion on it, and I was like, oh shit, backlight, that's amazing.
Look at all these colors in this game I've never seen before.
Yeah, well, the unique thing about my DS, the original DS, was I got it 3 or 4 months before it came out in the UK because I was on holiday in Dubai.
This was, mind blown at the time.
And we went into the supermarket and it was just there to buy. And I was like, holy shit, this isn't out for like ages. I'm going to get this before anybody else has it in my country. And so we bought the DS there. Unfortunately, they didn't...
What style charging slot did it have?
It was a regular charger, but you just used the US
There's a US charger,
kind of
okay.
pin. US pin I had with it to plug it in, I think, was the deal. Although I think they probably imported it from Japan, I would imagine. Though
Okay.
I'm not 100% certain. Not certain on
Japan
that.
do use US plugs.
Oh, do they? Okay,
Yeah,
that makes sense then. That would be logical. Because I think it was around the time it had come out in the US and Japan at that point, but it was like March of the next year that it came out in Europe. So yes, I had the big chonk DS, which at this point is like I don't know where the charger is for it, and I don't know if I can find a charger that would works for it. So it's kind of sitting there dead with the battery done, and it's got a bunch of stickers on the back of it that are like half peeled off and everything. Yeah, it's a bit of a mess at this point in time. After that, I upgraded to the DS Lite. I got the black DS Lite, which is the sleekest piece of hardware Nintendo maybe have ever made, aside from the Switch. It's amazing, and I love those soft buttons. I then got the 3DS, and then after the original 3DS, I went back and got a DSi XL. And my reasoning for this was because the 3DS didn't play DS games particularly well, and so I knew my hinge basically broke on my DS Lite, and I was like, man, I would love to keep going back to DS games on this thing, but it's not going to be playable or viable. So I got a big XL, DSi XL, so that I could have it for the future, essentially. So even now, to this day, if I want to play a DS game, I can just play it on that big thing, and it's actually so much nicer. It's a really nice piece of hardware that I don't think a lot of people owned necessarily. It was the first, I believe the first XL model that Nintendo did of a piece of their hardware was the DSi XL, and it's awesome. It's really fantastic. So yeah, 3DS before that. So that was the launch 3DS. That was a blue one. Then a red DSi XL. Then I had the 3DS XL, which was a capture card unit that I got from the place in Japan that did capture cards, and it was just a red regular one. Transferred all my stuff from my regular 3DS over to that. That capture card part of that thing died, and so I bought a second fucking capture card one. By this point in time, was a 3DS new 3DS XL, so it's my third 3DS, but also had capture in it. I believe the capture still works. I haven't tried it in a while now, and that was a silver one, and I had to transfer that over again. It was fucking the process for transferring 3DSs of like, oh god, a bit of a nightmare, but it did eventually happen and work. Especially the thing that annoys me about the new 3DS XL, lots of things that annoy me about it. First of all, the fucking stylus placement. What the fuck, Nintendo? Second of all, the micro SD card is like in the back, and you have to unscrew the back of the fucking thing to get it. Ugh. Just terrible design decisions across the board.
My blue 3DS, new 3DS XL, like the paint is all just flaking off as well. Like it's just really not nice.
Yes. And then, of course, Switch at the end of that line. And then again, console much simpler, which is GameCube, Wii U, Switch.
All of them on launch?
No, GameCube was my birthday of that year, as you well know, and that was December, so it had come out, I believe, in March or May. It was May, right, because it was around your birthday when it came out. And I got that. Then I technically got like a day after launch because of a whole nightmare situation where we couldn't find one, and then my parents did find one, but they told me they didn't, and I got really mad about it, and then actually it was revealed to me that I did have one.
What a cruel joke.
Yeah, I mean, I was stoked when I realized I had been trolled and it was there, but still, it was killing me for a while. And then the Wii U was launched. I think my first console on launch day, technically, because the Wii was like a day after launch day.
That was the only one I missed.
Yeah, exactly. There you go, Wii U, and then obviously Switch launch day as well. So
got to both be on launch there.
Yeah, and we both also owned the Super Nintendo Classic. Wouldn't sure you count that as a console, but it's a thing. It's a piece of hardware. So yeah, there you go. Mainly, as you can tell, like Nintendo and their iterative handheld stuff really got me in a way, and you as well in lots of ways, right? Of just we're gonna go and get the next iteration, and guess what? They're probably coming out with a Switch Pro this year, and we're probably gonna get that too. So
yeah,
that's how it goes.
I think we're both up for Switch Pro day one. Probably with Breath of the Wild too. We'll see what happens.
Well, fingers crossed. We'll see.
Crossed. Our next email is from Danny, who's from Sheffield. Says, "Hi fellas, I'm a new listener and it's great to hear some fascinating Nintendo opinions from fellow Brits. I have a permanently docked Switch and use a Switch Lite for my handheld play. Do you think that when Nintendo closed the eShop in 10 years or so, that a secondary Switch will still have access to go online and check that you have the right to play the title, or will it just become a useless peripheral? I really hope Nintendo doesn't shaft its loyal customers on this. Thanks in advance, Danny from Sheffield." No, Nintendo have never shafted their loyal customers.
Never. No, of course not. Not in their MO. Like, that's never something that they would do. So this is interesting because I think like a lot of chatter at the moment when Sony were closing down or proposed to close down the PS3 and Vita stores alongside PSP, which they are actually following through on, which makes sense to some degree. It's like, who the fuck is still playing a PSP at this point in time? But it's a really troublesome thing that I feel lots of ways about in terms of losing access to stuff. Like, you think about how rich the Virtual Console library was on Wii, and it's just gone now. Like, you just can't access it anymore unless you literally bought everything from the store, backed it up on like every micro SD card or SD card that you had around. You can't play those. You can't go and get them again. And that sucks, frankly, because, and I wouldn't be as bummed about it if this wasn't the case, because these companies don't put them out again, right? Like, they shut down these stores, but there's no way for you to legally get them anymore. If Nintendo were better about maintaining that library, like having it follow through from generation to generation, and you kept maintaining those games generation to generation, kind of what Xbox is doing at the moment in some ways, of like, hey, old games are new again and you can still play them and they're here and available. I would be less annoyed or less kind of terrified by the prospect of them closing stores down, but they have shown that they are willing to do it, and that they have done it twice already, I believe, with the DSi store and with the Wii store. So both of those now gone. No way to access games or download them anymore. I feel like 3DS is on its way out in, let's say, the next 5 or 6 years, just because that seems like Nintendo's...
Could be shorter than that, but yeah.
Could be even shorter. That's kind of why I'm going on a bit of a 3DS spree right now and buying things before everything disappears and goes away and I'm never able to access them again. Because it's a real thing, and it probably will happen. And so Nintendo shutting down the Switch store, this is the thing where I feel we need to wait a little bit to see whether that would be an idea that they would carry forward. It just depends on like their model of what their next console is, right? Like, if it is an iterative thing, that is another, like a Switch 2, for example, that builds off of the architecture that they have already, that builds off the servers that already run the current eShop, it would be logical, right, day one, for you to log on to your next Switch, and similar to what PlayStation has done and similar to what Xbox has done, you can just go to the store and every game from the previous generation is just there and works and is available to be downloaded, right? That would be the dream scenario in which you would be able to do that, because what that means is it would inextricably link their current hardware to their previous hardware, and therefore make it far less likely that they would even be able to shut the store down, because it's all tied together in one big thing, right? Mm-hmm. So that is my hope, and I'm kind of unsure or skeptical about whether that will actually happen. And I think 3DS is definitely, and Wii U, both of which I would imagine, like, I can see a scenario where they shut down the Wii U shop alongside the 3DS shop, even though the Wii U is way younger, just because it was such a massive failure and like nobody is playing it right now. So that's kind of where I'm feeling things are going at the moment. Bally, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's one of those things where ultimately video game companies, developers, they're here to make money. There's really little money in keeping these old shops open, and
in fact, there's losing money because they are paying for servers to be up. Yeah.
In fact, there's losing money in many cases, exactly. And yes, it would be nice if video games are as much a cultural staple as they are a technological advancement. So yes, it would be nice if developers were, the ambassadors, the gatekeepers of cultural history, but that's just not what a video game developer's job is to do. And I would be wholly supportive of other organizations making sure that they're on top of the whole sort of historical nature and saving that culture in some ways, because I think that it's a shame, but I don't think we can expect companies to be the cultural arbiters of historical curiosities,
for sure,
is a shame in some senses, for sure. So in that sense, yeah, anything digital that we love today will be gone at some point unless huge steps are made by external organizations to protect those things. So yeah, in that sense, totally buy up on physical discs and things where you can, but bear in mind, you'll need updates and all these things. So everything ultimately comes back to digital. In Nintendo's case, yeah, I think the Wii U eShop, 3DS eShop will close at some point. I agree that because the Switch has been so unbelievably successful, a bit like the PlayStation 4, I think Sony have done a pretty good job in some ways, in terms of I should say, just the PS4 shop is open, it's very synced up to the PS5 shop. That's going to be the case for a very long time to come.
Whether you'll download a PS4 or PS5 version of a game, though, who the fuck knows?
It's a slight separate issue, but they've done a good job of saying, look, this shop is important to us and we're going to keep it open. I agree that the functionality of version control is not great.
I feel like their hand was somewhat forced on that aspect, just because of what Xbox has been doing with just aggressive, really good backwards compatibility stuff.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a factor, but I think the number one factor is just the fact that there are so many PlayStation 4s out there, and the fact that there are so many PlayStation 4s out there is probably the number one reason that so many people are keen to buy a PlayStation 5, and so many of those people will want to carry over their data and stuff. Even though I've not carried across save data without having PS Plus or anything, I can just go and download any digital PS4 game I bought on the PS4, like Witcher 3 or Uncharted Lost Legacy or whatever.
It's also kind of a question of library, right? Both of these new consoles, pretty dismal library so far in terms of exclusives and number of actual brand new games for the system. So you need to, in that first few months, it's not like back in the day where Nintendo would be hey, anyway, let's release 2 games on launch for N64, and that's basically it for however many months. I mean, Nintendo did do that with the Wii U, to be frank, even though you could transfer stuff over virtual console wise from Wii to Wii U and that type of thing. But yeah, I think in our modern era, people expect a lot more, and people expect to be able to keep their stuff, especially when you look at Apple and how successful they've been, and the ability that people have to maintain their Apple account and move their apps from device to device. Just, it doesn't make logical sense anymore for companies to...
I've got the same few programs that I must have got back in about 2006, 7, and it's just continued on Apple laptops through that, because I do a system transfer every time, and it's just that same document is just passed down the generations. And
yeah, totally.
It's really well organized. Yeah. Like I was saying, I just think the success of the Switch, I don't think Nintendo are going to move away from that ecosystem anytime soon. I think a Switch 2, there's a very strong chance it will play Switch games, have access to the Switch eShop. I wouldn't say it's impossible these things aren't true, but because Nintendo have shafted people many a time. But you look at something like the DS that just had a full-on Game Boy Advance slot. That is a very bold statement that said, we still want this to be able to play Game Boy Advance games for at least the next 3-4 years before, the DS Lite came out.
Yeah, and I mean, like, if we're actually taking them at that word of the third pillar thing, like, that made more sense in terms of, hey, we kind of want to see how this thing does. Also, the Game Boy Advance has a shockingly short lifespan, right? For, like, as successful as it was, that thing sold so many units, despite the fact that it was around on the market for like 4 years or so. It was not a long lifespan for the GBA, but it did work in that brief period of time, and so yeah, it is interesting that that's kind of how it wound up. And yeah, does Nintendo ever go back to that brand? I don't think so at this point. Switch has kind of like replaced it as a handheld idea in many senses. Yeah. But specifically what Danny's talking about with the secondary Switch stuff, here's the thing, like, to be frank with you about it, what you're doing with that secondary Switch stuff is already kind of circumnavigating what Nintendo really want you to do in the first place. They would rather you just start a new account on a new Switch and not transfer anything over, and not like be able to switch to an ability to play those handheld and check in with the clock to make sure that you don't have internet access and you can't play it necessarily if you don't have internet access. So I feel like it's already kind of a jank solution for people to be able to do that, as much as people are able to do it. None of these companies really want that, to be frank, but they kind of have to in other cases. But I think that this is less tied to the eShop and more tied to just internet access and their like pinging your ability to own a game. I think it's more an account level thing than necessarily a store level thing. So I would imagine, even if they do shut down the Switch eShop, the store might be shut down, but your Nintendo account still exists, right? We see this even today with 3DS and Wii U share a wallet with Switch. And so if you buy something on the 3DS and you get gold points or whatever, that goes into your joint gold points account, which counts for your other consoles, or your, it's not necessarily gold points. I think you only actually get gold points for buying on Switch. But if you, for example, like I did, put money onto my Switch account to buy a game, I can take that cash and use it on the 3DS shop, or I can use it on the Wii U shop, because the wallet is all tied as one, and that's on an account level. Versus the shop itself, where, when the 3DS and Wii U shop shut down inevitably, my Switch account will still exist, and that account with that money on it, even if I had put that money onto that account from a 3DS, I would still have that money and it would still be accessible to me, right? So that's kind of where I'm thinking this would come down to it. But again, like, I don't know their back end. I don't know how all these technicalities of these things work. But yeah, have you, Bally, thought about, if when we get a Switch Pro, doing this type of thing of like having one Switch that is docked, one that is not, and switching between them and setting that all up? Or do you think it's just too many hoops?
Just depends how easy it is to set up, really. I'd be interested in trying it. But honestly, I'm not someone who has to have all my games with me all the time, where I'd be happy to just be like, right, any new game, I'm just going to get it on the Switch Pro, and I don't mind moving that between the dock and handheld, or when I go on holiday or something. And that's kind of what I've done with the PlayStation 5. Like, I've not bothered. When I had PS Plus, I didn't get any of my save data across. I don't mind starting games again. Like, if I beat a game on the system, I don't have to go back into that save file necessarily. There's some exceptions, but like, I'm not that attached to the idea. If it's easy, I'll give it a go, but I'm not overly attached to it.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think like you can do a full transfer, right? So I would imagine if I got a Switch Pro, I would probably just do a full transfer and just transfer everything over, and then maybe use that second Switch as one that I would log into and keep docked, and still have access to all my stuff just from the account level, but have my actual primary Switch be the Switch Pro, which is probably what I'll end up doing. But again, we have no idea if that even exists still. It's all still rumours, even though it's a lot of smoke. Still probably is going to happen. So, cool.
But yeah, thank you very much for your question, Danny. And that's all we've got time for emails this segment on this week's show. But join us in the third segment. Well, I should say, if you want to send in an email, please send it to ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That is ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. There's also a channel in our Discord server. Share a comment, a question in that server. That'd be much appreciated. But yeah, that is all we got time for emails in the second segment. Join us after the break. We're going to talk about Giant Bomb and video game podcasts. Be right back.
All right, everyone, welcome back to the third and final part of today's show. And we're going to talk about a thing that we both care about very deeply, which is GiantBomb.com, a video game website, supposedly, that I've been following since around, I want to say, end of 2012, start of 2013. And if you had been listening to this podcast for any amount of time, you will know that we are fans of Giant Bomb, both because we reference them all the time, but also because some of our formats we just straight up steal from Giant Bomb. So like our top 100, top 50 games, maybe we're going to do our top 100, who knows, our top 50 games of all time and our Game of the Year stuff is generally just like, hey, Giant Bomb does this thing where they argue to make a list, and that is basically what
Combined
we
lists.
did as well. And I think it's a really fun format. I think they're geniuses for coming up with it back in the day. The idea of like Game of the Year being this giant like multi-hour podcasts where a lot of these websites did this, right? IGN do this, GameSpot do this, where they have the whole staff like go together into a room and figure out what the Game of the Year is going to be. But Giant Bomb were like, okay, but what if we just record that and then that's the content? And it's amazing because it's just like such great conversations about those games, getting really in depth about them, and just figuring out like how to get it up the list, get it down, making deals. Like it's a great format, and obviously credit to them for that. Obviously our podcast is like an amalgamation of influences of all the different things that we like in the video game space, but Giant Bomb are kind of chief among them. And so we have this email from Acerbis who wrote in that I'm going to use as a jumping off point here, who writes, hi MBZ Bally, here's a quick two-parter for you regarding the recent changing of the guard over at Giant Bomb. Question 1, what are some of your favourite Giant Bomb memories? Question 2, you've definitely answered this before, but why not give us an update on your go-to outlets for podcasts, news/reviews in 2021? I'm sure there are plenty of listeners who need to fill a giant beast car-shaped hole in their hearts. Congratulations on moving up one place in the list of greatest podcasts in the universe. So we're making our way up there. Just all these other podcasts disappearing, dying. We're just slowly making our way up to the top, Bally.
We're outliving quite a few, which is
we just outlived them
crazy.
all.
Yeah.
That's how we win. So maybe we just start off of like Giant Bomb and what's happened there. Basically,
good point.
The people who have left, the three of the most key members of the site, so Brad Shoemaker, Vinny Caravella, Alex Navarro, all left the site. And it's not really clear why necessarily. I think people can read into...
And it was with more or less immediate effect as well, which I think was very shocking.
Yeah, I think they had been discussing it. They'd been discussing it in the background. Jeff had mentioned that before, that they were going to leave the website. But this is the interesting part about Giant Bomb is like, and especially over the last like year and a half or 2 years, there's been a lot of departures, right? Dan left, then Abby left, and then Ben left very recently, and now these three OGs are leaving as well, which leaves the site very barren of people, right? And that is a big deal because Giant Bomb is a site about the people, right? Like I think brands are all well and good. If you're an IGN, if you're a GameSpot, that's fine. Most people just know those brand names. They don't really know many of the people there unless you're really in the weeds and listen to the podcast and watch the videos and keep up with that stuff like I do. But Giant Bomb was special and different in that you knew everybody and what their tastes were and who they were as people, and I think there's definitely a line of like parasocial relationship that people can have, and so like I wouldn't say like I know who these people are because this is just like a part of them that they put on the internet just like we do all the time, right? But I think they're all awesome people, and that site has done a great job of hiring new people all the time and making it work. And so yeah, I'm just interested your thoughts on this, Bally, and what's happened and what you think it's going to mean and what this mean in general, maybe for the wider games media space, and if places like Giant Bomb kind of, I think one of the issues of newer people joining was there's not really any mobility within that company, right? Like the old heads are the old heads and they're going to stay there forever, except now they're not, now they're gone, right?
And that was definitely made clear by especially Abby and Ben when they left. Like there's some stuff we do know, a lot that we don't know, but that was just a couple of points that were picked up in sort of interviews when they left. That like it's a very flat company in that sense.
Yes.
Yeah, I started listening to Giant Bomb a little bit after you, sort of summer 2013. Absolutely love them. Just quintessentially my favorite video game podcast for sure. What do I think this will do for the industry? What does this mean? it's difficult because their model is not really a model that you see very often. They were essentially doing Patreon before Patreon. You know, they were doing the subscription model before Patreon for a video game content website. There weren't really anyone else doing that to the same degree. So that in itself was unique. I think the biggest thing that Dan said when they announced this news was just like how real these people are. Like, yes, they have their on-screen personas, as it were, but you still know that what they're saying is real. Like, it feels real. It's their opinions. They're not scared, and I think their attitude of not being scared obviously stems from the way it was founded. Jeff walking out of GameSpot, these sorts of things. Like,
well, I mean, being forced to walk out of GameSpot,
being forced to leave GameSpot, walking out, same difference. But I think that's a core value that, you know, doesn't matter who's developing, publishing this game. If it comes out and it's shit, we're going to tell everyone that it is shit.
Yeah.
And that's part of the fun of the website. I think they just do a great job of shooting from the hip, not being scared to call a spade. And in an industry where there's a lot of shady business going down, I think it's good to have people that aren't in the pockets of sponsors, advertisers, these sorts of things, but they're also not purely. They never just cover stuff for the sake of covering the biggest hits of the time. Like, even to the point where one criticism I have is sometimes there's a really hot game that comes out, and I'm like, why haven't Giant Bomb talked about it yet? And it's just because they're very real about who they are as a staff. They do share games with who they think would be interested in playing that game, and if no one is going to be interested in playing that game, they probably won't cover it, and that's okay, you know. Like, and I think it's important that I do get a sense that there are some people coming on the scene who just feel the need to play everything, because if you don't have an opinion on the latest game, you're not relevant, and if you're not relevant, you're not going to grow, and if you're not going to grow, then why are you even on the internet, sort of thing. And it's like that vicious cycle of you got to be the newest, latest hotness. And Giant Bomb was just like, we're above that all. That's not the reason people listen to us, and that's really refreshing to see.
Yeah, totally. And I think that the other part of it is it's not just the video games why you listen to them, right? Like they very much were in some ways a comedy website as well, just like very funny people riffing and like you know, being able to have those types of conversations in a very relaxed but also very hilarious way. And especially like I think the Beastcast is probably one of the best podcasts of all time. Yes. At its peak, when it had Abby, Dan, and Alex, and Vinny, as well as Jeff Backlor on there, like that is like peak podcasting. Some of my favorite moments when you can get into these, but the moment with Dan and the voice changer where he's like playing this character called Jeremiah, it just like fucking tore me to pieces. Like absolutely fucking hilarious stuff. And so they have that alongside these people, a lot of which stems from, you know, those GameSpot days with Jeff and Brad and Vinny and Alex, of course, back then, of the industry knowledge, right? Like, I don't know that there is anyone who has more in their brain about video games and the industry than Jeff Gersman. He is literally a walking encyclopedia, and it is, like, one of the most impressive things. I think we talk about, or at least for me, when I want to listen to a podcast, about video games specifically, I'm always looking for one of two things, right? One, is it entertaining, and does it have people who I vibe with and enjoy listening to? And two, are they people who are smarter than me, in the case of like knowing more about the industry that I can learn from? And Giant Bomb was just like that perfect symmetry of those two things, where those people knew their shit, they were good at talking about it, and they, you know, were honest and great at that, but they also made me laugh all the time. So yeah, and this is a weird thing, right? Because the website isn't dead necessarily, right? Like, it's still happening, but it's going through a reboot, and I don't know what that's going to mean. They have talked about like making the site more diverse and with younger people coming in and things like that. And I think that's something that they had been going in that direction for a little while, you know. And I think it's something that people had called them out for some degree. But I think they are now hopefully taking those steps to do that stuff, and I think we could get a different Giant Bomb that still maintains that that level of authenticity that you want from that website. And I think someone like Jeff Gerstmann is just really well positioned to like mentor new people into this industry. And I definitely foresee something happening where like he ushers in a new era of Giant Bomb and then kind of leaves it, you know. I think that probably is possible.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying about the knowledge thing is important, and like how knowledgeable Jeff is, because I think he's arguably much more knowledgeable than a number of other members at Giant Bomb. That's not to like say they're not knowledgeable about the industry, and I think that was one point made about like the new hires. It was just like, these new hires aren't knowledgeable enough about the game industry, and it's like, but that's missing the point of what Giant Bomb is, where it's that perfect blend where some members of the team are incredibly knowledgeable about the industry, have been for a very long time, and others are there because they fit the ethos and the culture of Giant Bomb. And I think with these new hires, a lot of people will say, oh, the perfect Giant Bomb person is someone who's really knowledgeable and has played everything, and it's not at all. And it definitely took me a while to realize that. But why I think Ben and Abby worked so well was they were just the right vibe. They were hilarious. They had really interesting tastes in video games, and it's more so the vibe and taste in games. I think that's the crucial part of what Giant Bomb does going forward. Like it's impossible for Jeff Gerstmann to hire another Jeff Gerstmann. There isn't anyone.
Yes,
you know?
Of course
the closest people, arguably, who are similar would be someone like a Greg Miller, and he's doing his own thing. You know, he doesn't want to come and want to work for Giant Bomb. So like,
exactly.
I think that with Giant Bomb, you're right. It's important Jeff can pass down that knowledge. What he has in video games is so unique, but it's so crucial that the new hires just fit the right vibe, and hopefully they are a younger, more diverse Giant Bomb moving into the future. And they have been going that way, totally. Yes, and that's really positive to see. So yeah, I just think that yes, they are a news site. Yes, their knowledge is hugely important. It's certainly a big reason why I listen to Giant Bomb. But as you were saying, I do think the entertainment trumps that in a really positive way. For
sure. Yeah. And, you know, I think they haven't really gone wrong with a hire, right? Like I think that they have basically nailed it every single time.
Yeah.
And that gives me confidence for the future of it, that they will be able to do that again. Obviously, it will be like a resetting period, and I think they're kind of going through that right now. Like, I think a lot of what they were talking about is like, because they are this weird hybrid of like they're a subscription site, but they are also funded by a big company, and they just got sold to a different company, right? One of the things they've talked about is Red Ventures as a company seems much more invested than CBS ever was in them, which is good news, I think, and hopefully makes it so that they can actually do stuff that they wanted to do but were never able to. But you've got to, as Jeff said, like, stop and change the wheels. You can't be changing the wheels in motion like they were trying to do for so much of what had been happening. And yeah, I do wonder also of like COVID and everything and how much that has influenced people's decisions to leave the site, because most of them have been during that period of time, right? Like Abby, Ben, and now these three, all kind of people after COVID has happened, maybe reassessing what they want to do and things like that. So I'm interested. I don't know what these other people are going to do, whether they're going to go off and do something together. I doubt that. I think they're probably just going to look for some other thing within the space. But I'll follow whatever they do because there's some great people. Especially Alex, I think, is a really underrated member of Giant Bomb, and he has become one of my favorites over the years. Like his takes on things and his kind of in Game of the Year especially, he's really, really good at articulating himself and like talking about games and yeah, some great people. But should we get to the specific question, Bally, about Giant Bomb memories? What are some of your favorite moments over the years of Giant Bomb?
Obviously, Game of the Year is the number one thing I look forward to from Giant Bomb, especially these last 4 years as I've been much more engaged cross-platform. It's been hugely interesting, entertaining, just seeing and hearing. And it's not even like, it's really interesting just hearing them talk about these games. It's like hearing their personal arguments about this is why this game hit me in this way. And like some really emotive stuff that like, especially some of like Vinny's arguments around, especially Spiritfarer, which was last year, right? And,
yep.
You know, they'll like Vinny pushing for a game, but then they're not quite getting it. A bit like a Luigi's Mansion 3. Like there's just so many moments in Game of the Year where like, wow, and it's not even to do with maybe the top 2, top 3, top 4 discussion. It's that
no, totally not.
It's the general wider discussion. Normally, it's normally in and around the debate of what becomes top 10, but I think that it gets the most heated and the most emotive at the same time. But also I think the strongest arguments come out of that time. And as someone who's now been podcasting since 2013, it's so great to hear, like, it's the only time you listen to someone in the industry and they're basically like almost tying the game to part of themselves and fighting for it. And actually, this is important to me for these reasons and why this game hurt me or made me feel joy. And this is why I need to convey that to you in order to help me get this game up this list. It's like, you don't get that raw passion about a video game anywhere else online in the video game space that I've seen. And I absolutely love that. It's easily the best part of Giant Bomb. But other memories, obviously Dan is probably my favorite member traditionally of Giant Bomb. He's just hilarious, out there, has a few similar video game opinions on things to me. He's very good on Nintendo stuff, which is always refreshing.
Yeah, I think Dan, like, his taste was probably the most aligned with our taste.
Definitely.
Right? Like, as Nintendo people, yeah, sure.
But he can be as loud and ridiculous and obnoxious as he wants to be, while at the same time he can bring it down a few tiers and be really hard hitting and, you know, emotive to certain points. And like him bringing stuff like Mario Party and
Mario Party, man, what a thing! Like that live version of Mario Party was amazing. I really loved that.
That live video of Mario Party is probably my number one video on Giant Bomb, and
it's pretty good.
Dan and Drew's rivalry is maybe the best thing ever. But Dan was just so good at bringing fresh ideas to Giant Bomb. And I know that's something that he always found difficult because they're in such a cycle of getting out quick looks, getting out streams, doing all this editing behind the scenes, that it is really difficult to bring in new ideas and have bits and do a new show like he did with, what was the name of the DK one?
Burgle My Bananas.
Which was really funny. Like that was, and stuff like Steal My Sunshine, which I think was even stronger. Like that was just
like the game show stuff that he brought.
It was just a perfect coming together of a crazy game with just this crew of people who all had mixed ability when it came to platformers, which I think added to it, with the game show thing, with everyone getting frustrated with the game while Dan just had this positivity about Super Mario Sunshine. It was just so hilarious. And yeah, those are definitely my three. Game of the Year, Mario Party, and Steal My Sunshine being my top three Giant Bomb things. Oh, and obviously like E3 coverage, like just the snark, the sheer snark and jokes when they were covering live stuff, but also their E3 couch, which I think is something that's been greatly missed since COVID started, 2020. Like
so missed.
And it's great that Jeff Gerstmann is still there, and there's the potential that couch can continue at some point. Like that's good news.
Yeah, for sure. E3 kind of felt like people coming back, you know, like people who had left the site, like Patrick and Austin and those folks would always be back on the couch at E3 time, which is always a really nice thing, right? Like having that wider Giant Bomb family. And I think that's one of my other favorite things about this is like they had a crew of people like, you know, Johnny Vignacchi and Dave Lang and Adam Boyes and all those people. Like that is absolute, like those three on a couch, like we got it for like maybe 4 or 5 years, and it was like my absolute favorite time of the year was those three, the last segment of E3, just fucking madness going off. Amazing. Just like nothing to do with video games at all. Just those three being fucking idiots was like the best thing, like peak Giant Bomb viewing. And that was just fucking incredible. That stuff is always on my favorite. When
John Vignacchi got the job with Disney, and it was like, because previously he'd been on the couch and he was just this Joker guy, whatever. But then he had like this very senior role at Disney, and all of a sudden there was like this corporate responsibility that he felt, but he was still very drunk and on this couch live, and it was just this combination of like trying to be a corporate kind of like, he was trying to be a good boy, not say anything out of line, while also being very drunk and messing around with all these clowns next to him, and just that just made for like amazing television. Like it's just hilarious.
Totally. And it's obviously like he's at Nintendo now, and so of course he could never go on that show. If you work for Nintendo, you can't go on the Giant Bomb couch. I don't think they've ever had actually, you know what, I think they had one of the indie guys from Nintendo come by on one of the years. Maybe it was the final year of the show being live, which was in 2019, I guess. that they did have Kirk, I believe, who is one of the indie guys who came onto the couch. But
really?
Yeah, it's really rare for that to happen. But the Phil Spencer interview that Jeff did every year was just amazing, like so good. And Phil is such an honest person, like executive wise in the video game industry. I don't think there's anyone who's more straightforward and like straight shooter.
And there's all like, as Xbox was on the rise under Phil with Game Pass being announced and Jeff being like, tell me about this, and it's some really exciting times.
Yeah, and Jeff always asking him about obscure Xbox games, because Jeff's wife loved like these obscure Xbox games like Sudeki and things like that. It was always funny. And yeah, so that I think for me was one of the highlights, even maybe in some ways above Game of the Year. I think Game of the Year definitely still a peak for me, but the E3 shows and the E3 couch of them doing those interviews and like having the really serious good interviews alongside the just off the rails shit was amazing. Like it was a great pairing, and like Jeff, just one of the best interviewers in the industry, just able to be at ease with people so naturally, and does such a great job of like asking questions and like getting interesting stuff out of people. So that is highlight for me as well, as alongside like I think one of my favorite E3 reactions they ever had is kind of like not very Giant Bomb, which is them kind of going crazy at the Mario Odyssey trailer when it was revealed that Mario could just like be all these things. That is one of my favorite reactions from them, because it is like they actually like are so into it, and it's it gets like a kind of passion out of them that you usually when they're watching like these E3 things, they're trying to be like kind of level with it and not like be fanboys or whatever, and just kind of cynics in some senses and like riff on it and make fun of it a lot of the time. But that was one of those moments where everyone was just like what the fuck is this? But like turning it into a comedy as well as being excited for what the hell it was, I think that was pretty amazing. But yeah, I think a lot of things that they had done in the past, there's the big live show that happened a couple of times throughout the site's history, and I think the last major one they did was in 2015, where they had like the fucking nachos
nacho cheese
mixture cocktail that they had, that Dan made, that Dave Lang had to drink, that was a fucking nightmare. Like Dan punching John,
the Oreos dipped in nacho cheese that Dan then liked.
Yes. Yeah, totally. And Dan punching John Drake in the face with the punch out thing, where he's playing punch out by hitting John Drake because they'd wired up like an NES thing to him. Like that whole thing with like different segments and going to different people, plus the premium stream with Dave Lang and Felix Kramer, and like pretending it was like a morning radio show. It was just like off the rails, unhinged stuff that I really enjoyed, and it's been a shame that they haven't had the ability to do that since. I think that's another one of those things of like they'd love to do more of that stuff, but like the constraints of the team size and the ability they had, and like speaking of that Game of the Year stuff, the skits they did, and I don't know if you've watched that last stream with Alex, Vinny, and Brad yet, Bally, but they watch back through some old stuff, and they watch back through some of those skits, and it's they did such a good job of like creating these fake TV shows basically, and like the acting in them and just like the comedy in them is just so fantastic.
The game of the year. So when they all go to San Francisco, and I think one of my favorite, when they were all in the studio together, it might be the last time they were all in the studio together, that original crew.
Yeah,
definitely for Dan. I guess it must have been the Christmas party 2019. I want to say. And Dan did like this whole game show thing, and they just ran the joke where like the top of Ben's head kept getting cut off, and it was just
I love
such stupid shit that was just so funny. And there's like this video of Abby trying to guess who Gordon Ramsay is through these questions, and it takes absolutely ages, and it's just hilarious. And,
there's the one where like it's Dan and Jason trying to guess a number, and they guess like every fucking number except for 4, which is the number. It's oh my god, yeah.
So just Dan put just a ton of different games into a hat. Some of them were video games, and others like for multiplayer, and others were just these dumb games like guess a number and shit like that. And it was just such a great coming together of just Giant Bomb silliness, and it was kind of maybe one of the last times that crew was all together, which was nice.
Yeah, and then alongside that, they did also do like premium stuff that was like just full game playthroughs of certain things. So Metal Gear Scanlan is one of my all-time favorites. Like I remember becoming a premium subscriber for Metal Gear Scanlan and downloading it onto my laptop because we went away for a weekend somewhere, and like being in bed at night and just like binging my way through that series and absolutely loving it, because I had never really known that much about Metal Gear and kind of wanted to understand it a bit more, but I didn't necessarily want to play those games because they're quite old. And so seeing it through the lens of like Drew, who was new to the series as well as Dan, who's like this hyper Metal Gear Solid fan, it was just an amazing combo, and them two playing through the games together was just so much fun. And seeing the entire story arc of how bizarre and crazy Metal Gear Solid is, and it finishing with me buying Metal Gear Solid 5, which I probably wouldn't have done had I not watched that entire series. So like it got me into a series I previously probably wouldn't have given the time of day, which is amazing stuff. And also with Yakuza, like I watched them play through Yakuza 0, which was a really fun playthrough, as well as Mass Effect. Alex played through the entire Mass Effect trilogy with Vinny. And so yeah, it's been quite a while since I have watched like full Let's Plays on YouTube, but Giant Bomb has always kind of continued to do that stuff, and I always enjoy watching them play through stuff because I think it's the format a lot of the time of it's not just one person, right? Like that's the thing with a Let's Play that can be quite hard, is it's one person talking to themselves a lot of the time, and like having the commentary to work through that is, as someone who's done a lot of that, quite tricky. But with Giant Bomb, having multiple people to riff off of and talk about the game at the same time as they're playing through it, like that's why the quick look format worked so well. And there've been some amazing quick looks over the years. Velvet Sundown is probably my number one quick look of all time. Is this game called Velvet Sundown, which was these characters on a boat, and everyone would play a different character. And you would type in responses to each other, and the game would read the responses in like the robot kind of AI voice, and it was absolutely fucking hilarious. It was just like some of the funniest shit, because it's revealed after, because you think that Vinny and Alex are going into this kind of random lobby with random players, and then it's revealed afterwards that the rest of the Giant Bomb staff were playing all these other characters, and so it just like adds this level of hilarity to what that game was. It was just fucking incredible. And yeah, I do just like having a quick look as a way to just have a understanding of what a game is if I'm not going to play it. It's such a great way of like widening my knowledge of what's going on and what games are coming out and that type of thing. And it's it's a thing that I wish more people would do. I think it's just a great format. So yeah. Any other memories you have particular about Bally that are in the bleeding in your brain? I love the Dan roller coaster challenge thing that Jeff and Dan did. That's an amazing video that I think has a lot of views on YouTube actually.
Australian beef
on the Bombcast. Yeah, that's a great saga. Good stuff there. And I mean, I didn't listen to the site that much when Ryan Davis was there, but it was about half a year or so before he passed away, sadly, that I was listening to the Bombcast, because he was the original host of the Bombcast. He was the person, he was really the host of Giant Bomb before Jeff like kind of took that role. He was always the one in the main seat on Unprofessional Fridays and stuff like that. So obviously losing him was just a tremendous loss, and that I think cast a shadow to some degree over the site. But I think that their ability to hire more people and go into a different era even post Ryan was pretty an amazing thing for them to do, and that's kind of why I have confidence in them at this point in time, even after all these people have left. To kind of carry that mantle.
And definitely every time someone new has joined, the vibe has changed, and it's taken a while to get used to, but a few shows in, and I think all of them just like settled in, and I was used to it, and this was like a new great thing each time. Sure, it always changed a little bit, but like that's just how these podcasts evolve. Like our show will have evolved as well, even though it's just the same two of us. Like things change and evolve, and
people change. You
can't stop that, even if you just keep the same people on. So yeah, the new hires have been fantastic, and yeah, let's hope. I'm sure I have every faith Jeff will has lots of new ideas and new hire ideas, and they can hire a new group of people who can make something great and new that is still has that Giant Bomb culture, but is something new and different.
Totally. Shall we answer a service's second question?
Yes.
Which is an update on your go-to podcasts, outlets, places to hear video game chatter in 2021. Bally, do you have any particular ones you want to shout out?
Yeah, you must have got me into it maybe 2 years ago at this point, at least. I don't know. But Kind of Funny Games Daily, I think, has become my number one podcast for how to learn more about the industry and keep up with cross-platform news. It's an hour show once a day, Monday to Friday, Kind of Funny Games. So the hosts range between Blessing, Greg, Tim. They brought a lot more Andy into it, and then they've got like loads of rotating chairs with like people like Gary Witter and this, and it's still got that kind of funny vibe. It's funny, but it is still news focused, and they will run through the stories of the day, and they will cover no matter what. And I think since Blessing joined, he must be like a year and a half.
Yeah,
ago
over a year. Over a year. Least, yeah.
And he's definitely been on the most shows since, and I just think he's such a great example of like his taste in games and the fact he is younger. I just think he's like the future of kind of what Kind of Funny's about and what the video game industry is about. And I think he's done a lot of great stuff over there. Just yes, they will run through the stories, but then they'll always give their take on why something is the way it is and what it's like. It's not just quoting verbatim, that's also giving it a take on, and that's important. And I think my video game knowledge has improved tremendously since like listening to them every day. And as someone who often doesn't have the time to sit down and read all these articles and things, it's just a great way of taking that information Monday to Friday. So that'd be my if the aim of listening to video game podcasts is to be informed about video game news and stuff, I think it is probably the number one.
Yeah, I for me, like Twitter and that show is mainly how I find out about stuff and things that are going on. We live in this era now where everything has been so kind of homogenized into one or two platforms that, I don't know how websites are doing these days. I'm sure obviously you get traffic to them, but most websites that I click on are via a Twitter link or via a thing that has been linked somewhere else, and not actually proactively going to the site and looking for stories. That's just not what I do, or how I kind of get things or information. But yeah, they are definitely a really good source of news and updates and that kind of thing daily. I also am a big fan of Waypoint and what that crew does in terms of politics and video games mainly. Like they are, for me, I think, in terms of my own personal politics, a big influence in terms of developing that understanding and kind of my positions on things and kind of how I view things. And I think had it not been for them, I don't think I would be as informed on a lot more wider things going on in the world and those types of
You've definitely
issues.
evolved a lot in like the last couple of years, predominantly due to outlets like Waypoint.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, I've been into my politics for a long time now, but like it's nice to see you're like getting much more into it through stuff like this. So yeah, they're really great.
And they're if you want to be radicalized, listen to Waypoint. They're a good podcast for that. Very, very good. And I think also just Austin, just one of the smartest people in the games industry. Just the way he articulates himself, the way he like comes, even at just discussing games, I find like so riveting. And anytime he talks about anything, it always grabs my attention. So yeah, they are a high recommendation from me, and they come out on Friday, but they also have Monday as well. So if you're looking for a giant Beastcast sized haul, then they are definitely a good one to go to. Bally, any others that you want to shout out?
Probably my number one cross-platform thing that isn't a giant bomb, I guess, is MinMax.
Yes.
So it was started by Ben Hansen about a year and a half ago as well, maybe 2 years at this point.
Yeah, left Game Informer and started.
Yeah, so he left Game Informer, set up this new thing, and he's got a few new hires, to be honest, as well.
Yeah, they kind of have like a rotating kind of group of people to some degree.
Yeah, and some people have left them, and like some people coming in, and for me, like it's just a real shame how small they are, because he is just like, we talk about how great an interviewer Jeff Gerstmann is. Like, I really rate Ben Hansen as like an interviewer and just a knowledge in the video game industry. He's also quite a bit younger than Jeff Gerstmann as well.
Yes.
And he's just such a knowledge, is such a great host. And my favorite thing about MinMax is probably, well, obviously the up-to-date video game coverage. We can't, they got a weekly podcast, but I love their deepest dives. I think last year I must have partaken in every single one bar one maybe of their deepest dives. So this is where they play a game, often in chapters. So I think they broke up Last of Us Part 2 into like 3 different episodes, and each episode is like 2 to 3 hours long, and it's just like 4 of them having a really deep discussion. And it's called Deepest Dive because they claim they're the deepest discussion of that game on the internet, and they'll give you like a point to reach in a game, like a chapter in a book, and then you can play that game up until that point and then go back to their video and watch it all. And they've done that across games like Halo Combat Evolved and like Batman Arkham Asylum they just did, and obviously Last of Us Part 2. A lot of story driven stuff often, and yeah, it's one of my favorite things honestly on the internet. And it's just a really feels like a really full way of playing a game when you know you can just check in with a deepest dive as well. So that's something I'm very happy that they do.
Yes, I think also Ben Hansen, he is very similar to me in that he is like a fan of the industry, and he just like listens to a ton of podcasts, and like is just up on everything that's happening. And he's he's good pals with Dan Reichert, who famously listens to no video game podcasts, which is just hilarious. That like, yeah, totally. It's very, very funny. Any others? I think I would shout out again Into the Aether, which is kind of independent games podcast by 2 friends who they're just very positive people, and they just make a show that is really delightful to listen to, and has good energy, good vibes, and they talk about pretty much everything, and like they just get very passionate about lots of different things and trying new things, and yeah, I think that show is excellent. And they also do kind of deep dives into specific games on like their bonus monthly podcasts, where they had one recently that went into Shadow of the Colossus and Eco, just completely diving into that, and they kind of have specific things that they will focus on from time to time, but mainly it's just about playing the stuff that they're really psyched about and enjoying. And very, very good podcast, Into the Aether. I would highly recommend them. But yeah, there's obviously other ones that I'm sure a lot of people will have heard of before, and but yeah, I have my podcast list is ridiculously long. It's stupid.
Can I give
it's
one
massive.
more that's very closely linked to Giant Bomb and is also new, and that's Fire Escape Cast.
Yes.
So when Dan left Giant Bomb, I thought, like, Dan loves video games too much. He's not going to stay out of this industry, whether it's like he just does something in a personal capacity or not. And he obviously set up like his big streaming thing. He's become like a big old streamer and playing all the current releases and doing all sorts of things on stream. But I was always confident he would come back and do some sort of podcast related thing. So himself, Mike Mahardy, and Mary Kish have teamed up to do their own podcast, which, like us, is every fortnight, which is interesting.
Yep.
And it's so great because I love Dan Reichert. I think Mary Kish and Mike Mahardy are also great. I think they share a lot of similar video game opinions to someone like me and you, MBZ, and as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's just more Dan Reichert, and it shoots from the hip. It's very honest. I think all 3 of them are really good pals as well. And they're really good pals in a way where they have been pals for a long time, but haven't done stuff as much on like mics together.
Yes, worked around the same spaces a lot, but not necessarily done that
for a
much
long time,
content.
sort of behind the scenes. Then in the last 2-3 years, they've been doing a bit more together, and now they're just like, right, now we're going to do this podcast. It goes long, and I like that. It's a fortnightly, like I said, so it can go long. And yeah, they just cover. They're only 3 episodes in. Like, this isn't much experience.
They've just started.
Yeah, it's cover the news, cover what they've been playing, and that's all we need from them.
Yeah, really good. I like that a lot so far. Yes, last a couple others that I just remembered. GameSpot After Dark. So GameSpot finally have their own podcast, which has been going for I think over a year now, and I really enjoy that. I think that has a good rotating crew of different people. It's kind of a good way for me to familiarize myself with some people who work at GameSpot who I maybe wouldn't have known about otherwise, because I don't follow the site that much. I mainly just follow people on Twitter from there, and so like hearing different voices coming in, they get some freelance people in, and it's really good to just like get a sense of the type of people working over there as well, because I think IGN did a very good job over the years of like having their staff be more front facing and forward, and I think GameSpot are doing a lot more of that now, which is good. And then Garnett Lee a man who is always in my heart for Weekend Confirmed, one of the greatest video game podcasts that ever existed. Sadly, died many years ago now. But he is back with a podcast that he does with his company Raw Fury, who are a smaller games publisher for indie games. And as someone who now works at a smaller games publisher for independent games, it's really interesting to hear him, and he also is on there with Jonas, who's like the founder of Raw Fury, and so they just have a show where they talk about the video industry and stuff, but they also talk a little bit about publishing and some of the things they do, and that I find really interesting for me personally, someone who now works in that industry. So yeah, it's called Games, Potatoes and Spatulas is the name of that podcast. And also Garnet moved to Sweden because that's where they're based, and so they also talk a bit about Sweden on that show every week, of like, here's our Swedish thing of the week type of deal, which that show has only just started, and it's good so far. I'm enjoying it. So if you have missed the voice of Garnet Lee, which how couldn't you, go check out Games, Potatoes and Spatulas. But yeah, I think that's pretty much a lot of the ones that I haven't mentioned before, / ones that I wanted to bring up again. But yeah, it's an interesting time, and I'm looking forward to what happens with Giant Bomb and seeing what happens with the folks who left and what they do. And already there's been some kind of people popping up. I think Vinny popped up on the tech podcast that Brad does with Will Smith, and Vinny was also on a stream with Abby playing chess recently as well. So you know, that stuff will keep happening, I'm sure.
Ben Hansen will get all three of them on in one big thing.
Yes, I know. He has a habit of like interviewing people who are leaving the games industry or leaving their jobs in the games industry for something different.
It kind of became a thing by accident.
It kind of did, yeah. There's just a lot of people leaving and reassessing what they want to do. So interesting times for sure in the game space. But yes, there we go. That's it's a deep dive on Giant Bomb and what's happening and all that stuff. Bally, let's close the show out with some stuff and some things. So E3 is happening? ? Nintendo are in it? ? And
they have confirmed they're in it. We just don't know the details.
We don't know any details as of time of recording. Maybe by the time this podcast goes out, we will know, but I'm guessing it's still going to be a little bit of a unknown. However, theoretically, the episode after this will be on the 7th of June, which will be a week out from when E3 should be happening. So, with that in mind, probably we will be doing predictions for Nintendo next time for E3. So I'm putting this as like a yes, probably this will happen. So we're going to give a call out to emails. So if you do have any predictions for Nintendo E3, that is probably what we're going to be talking about next time. But who knows what the fuck is going on with that show or anything to do with it. Bally, where can they send those emails with their predictions for hopefully a Nintendo E3 presentation?
Please email ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That's ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. And you can also post your E3 predictions in our Discord channel under emails. We will have a look at all those and like make some predictions of our own, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be good. So send those in and let us know. And I'm looking forward to it, man. I think feel like we'll get some good news out of Nintendo. Obviously, we had the Direct earlier in the year, and they broke the streak. And that was mainly focused on like up to the summer months and nothing really after. So aside from Splatoon 3, of course, which is like however long away.
Splatoon 3, that's the only one, yeah. Everything else, you're right. So I think the latest will be like Mario Golf, I guess.
Mario Golf and Skyward Sword, I think, is after that. So right. Yeah, HD. So hopefully Anuma will stand behind the background and actually say, hey, I'm going to talk about the video game you want to hear about this time.
Last time I was here, I didn't talk about the game you want to hear about.
So we'll see if that happens. Looking forward to it. Obviously, we are supported on the show by lovely, wonderful patrons who, help us out and help us create the podcast that you listen to. We'd like to thank some of those people. You can head over to patreon.com/ThisNintendoLife. Check out our bonus episodes and things like that. But Bally, we have some patrons we'd like to thank.
Yes, thank you to all of our patrons, but a special big thanks to all of our $10 tier patrons, who of course are Zach S, Atari Alex, Thomas, Matthew, and my fiance Caroline. Thank you for your $10 tier support. It's hugely appreciated. What was the last episode we put out? We talked about can't even remember now. What did we talk about in this Nintendo Life?
You played The Last Guardian.
I played The Last Guardian and I played Uncharted 4. So if you want to listen to those PlayStation 4 classics, go check that out for $1.
Absolutely. Yes, you can obviously find the show in various places all over the internet. We are on Stitcher, we're on Spotify, we're on all your podcasting apps, iTunes, the Apple Podcast app, whatever that is, if anyone even uses that. I think a majority of our listeners use Apple Podcasts, so tossing it off as like, this thing, most people still just use the basic podcast app, which is totally fine. It's good, it does the job. And yeah, you can go subscribe to us and also review us. That would always be helpful so that people can find the show more easily. Obviously you can find us on Twitter as well, where we're talking nonsense all the time. At TNL Podcast is where you'll find the podcast Twitter account with updates on when the show is coming out and those type of things. You can find me at LordNBZ. Bally, where can they find you?
I'm on Twitter at Ballyman91. That's BALLYMAN91.
Fantastic. And yeah, I think that's pretty much us covered. How are you feeling, Bally, about the summer of announcements? Obviously, Keighley has his summer of games or Game Fest or something. I think IGN is doing something as well. We've got quote-unquote E3 happening. We've got people doing their own presentations. I think EA's thing is scheduled for July now. Is anyone even going to watch that now that they're out of E3? I don't know if I will, to be honest. So
yeah, I'm just hoping that it's dense over a few days and not just strung out. But as you say, with EA being in July, that's not going to happen.
Well, let's be frank. Who enjoyed watching EA's thing anyway? Nobody.
Right,
so,
exactly. I'm just excited that Nintendo are back, and hopefully they do have a half-hour, 45-minute presentation, because it's been a while since they've done that at E3. So yeah.
Yep. For sure. So fingers crossed, and we'll see you all next time to just hopefully discuss that and see what's going on. But until then, thank you everybody for listening. We'll be back in a couple of weeks' time with some more video game podcasting and Nintendo chat. Until then, see you soon. Bye bye, folks. The musical interludes used on today's show were Investigation from Famicom Detective Club The Missing Heir, copyright Nintendo 2021, and Delphinus Delphis from Abzu, copyright Giant Squid 2016.